Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton, where in our open and welcoming community, we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors. We're really happy that you've joined us this morning. And if you haven't already stopped by the newcomer table, we invite you to do so after the service so that we can put you on our e-lists and get you information about our congregation and our many, many, many programs that we have going on this year. One of our announcements this morning is that today, after the worship service, we will gather to learn about various nonpartisan voter registration efforts that many of us are already a part of, as well as our denominational push, our Unitarian Universalist Association initiative, which is called UU the Vote. This is meant to be a conversation about our shared and similar efforts to increase voter participation as we head into this big election. That's today, right after worship, maybe about 10 minutes or so after worship, and we'll just gather right in here in Channing at the front of the room up here. Also, Fellowship Night is back next Saturday, the 14th at 6 p.m. in Founders Room. Fellowship Night offers playing board games and eating pizza as an excuse to get to know your fellow UU Princeton congregates better. You can bring your favorite board games or card games and be ready to play. Pizza will be provided. The event is free, but donations are accepted to help defray the cost of the pizza. And the big thing is, if you are going to go, we need you to go to the website and sign up on that Sign Up Genius for this event for Fellowship Night so that we know how much pizza to order. Again, that's next Saturday, September 14th, 6 p.m. in the Founders Room. And next Sunday, September 15th from 12:15 to 1:15 in Foz Theater, we invite you to gather for a children and youth ministry open house. Our fall and spring program for children and youth begin on October 6th here. And this open house is to learn about what is coming up for 2024-25. This is a great event to spread the word about and invite your friends and neighbors to. We are looking to arrange childcare with crafts and snacks for that open house. So if you can, please also RSVP for that on the UU Princeton website on the Sign Up Genius tab. And again, there's a lot happening here at UU Princeton happening. It's in the back of your order of service, has announcements about many of our different programs here. And now at this sacred hour, grateful for those who've come, welcoming one another today, and building the faith that will embrace those of tomorrow. Let us be together for the peace of deep breaths, the joy of shared smiles, and the beauty of voices raised together in song. And as we do this, we join in spirit with all congregations of our faith who gather this morning to praise the good, to care for one another, and to serve the world. Come, let us worship together.
Silence is not a way of denying yourself life. It is not even about denying yourself articulation. Silence is about moving from compulsiveness to consciousness. Silence does not mean shutting your mouth into silence, plugging your ears into silence. You can sing in silence, you can dance in silence, you can speak in silence. Guru Jaggi Vasudev.
Every year in September, we form new chalice circles, which are small groups that meet for connection and spiritual growth that meet throughout the year. And to invite your participation in them and tell you a little bit about them, we have testimonials and worship. Kicking us off this year, Maurice Hauk.
Thank you, Reverend Bill. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maurice, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my experience as a member of a chalice circle this past year. I'm a relative newcomer here. I started coming to services at UUCP in the spring of 2023, really just to give a ride to my mother. My mother, Marcia, just sitting there in the second row. Initially, bringing my mom to church each Sunday was an act of duty, a way to get her out of her apartment and spend some time with her each week. And I have to say, I was genuinely surprised how much the services meant to me. I'm at a pretty busy and pressured stage of life, you know, teenage kids, a marriage, work, helping to support my mom. And in UUCP, I was very surprised, maybe shocked is not too strong a word, to find a place where I could come and be accepted without judgment, where I could participate or not, or I could be quiet, where I could be made to think about my values and how I'm living my life. And for months, that's all I did. I brought my mother to church every week. I sat through the service. I had whatever feelings or reactions I had. And then in September of last year, when the chalice circles were described, it seemed appealing. It seemed like an opportunity to go a bit deeper into UU. And since then, I've been a member of a group led by Andy Maskell. We meet in person in Bordentown, one Monday night each month. In person was important to me. There's a set structure to the chalice circle meeting. So in advance, Andy emails us a set of quotes and questions that are related to the themes of the service. And then when we come together and we meet, we light the chalice, we review our covenant for how to participate. We have a brief check-in where members can talk about what's going on with them at the moment. And then we engage in the work of the chalice circle. We engage on the quotes and the questions. The dynamic of doing that is kind of like what little I've experienced of a Quaker meeting. We often sit in silence for a while until someone's moved to speak. So there can be a fair bit of silence. Not everyone chooses to share in response to each of the quotes or the questions. We do if we want to. Andy makes a judgment about when's the right time to move on. For me, the core of the experience is it really starts with listening, with doing my best to listen actively, compassionately, non-judgmentally, just trying to take in what the speaker is saying. In regular life, I try to be a good listener, but I'm almost always doing something else too. You know, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next, or I'm thinking about everything that's going on in my life besides this particular conversation. In the chalice circle, it's an opportunity to just really try to work on listening, just really try to focus on that. And then as part of my role in the chalice circle, I also I talk, several times per meeting. I am in life a pretty talkative person. I'm a person who tends to plan out what I'm going to say. In chalice circle, I try not to do that. I try to just have that experience of listening to others, check in on how I'm responding, what I'm feeling, and then talk and see what comes out. Sometimes it goes in an interesting place. So for me, one value of the chalice circle is just an opportunity to step outside of my life, the busyness, the pressure, the responsibility, and reflect on topics of value and importance, topics that I might not otherwise be engaging on as much. And to do that in a group of thoughtful, caring, committed people. Another benefit has been, I think, building a deeper understanding of UU, not in terms of specific beliefs, as much as just having this experience of participating in a collaborative, supportive process for the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So that's my experience. If you're interested in learning more about chalice circles, Kay has a table set up out in the lounge, or you can find info in your order of service or in Skylight. So thank you very much.
I invite you to join in our prayer this morning. This is number 512 in the back of your gray hymnal. 512. You'll have the response that's in italics, "We give thanks this day." For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements. We give thanks this day. For our human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. We give thanks this day. For faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. We give thanks this day. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. We give thanks this day. For human liberty and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. We give thanks this day. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Amen.
Good morning. I'm officially not on the Worship Associates roster. And when I saw in Skylights that today's topic for the sermon was improvement on silence, I immediately raised my hand to Reverend Bill and say, I need to talk about silence. I'm the wrong person to talk about silence, but I just had to share what I've been thinking about in the last few weeks and months. As a lot of you know, I grew up in South India, and a part of my childhood, teen years, especially in high school, was with my grandparents. My grandparents were progressive but traditional people. So in their conservative style, one of the traditions that they followed was menstrual isolation. So for 3 days of the month, you had to separate yourself from the family, sit in a separate room. You didn't get to touch things or eat meals together or participate in family activities. And then after those 3 days, you had a ritual bath, and then you re-entered life. I mean, you could go to school and college, whatnot, but that was the tradition. I hated it. I really, really hated it. And I argued and I fought against this patriarchal, misogynistic, repressive tradition, down with it. And I wore them down. They said, fine, fine, fine. You don't have to follow it. And I was so proud of myself for winning that battle, not only for myself, but for all my girl cousins back then. Now I've been thinking about that time nostalgically. And I was like, what is this make menstrual isolation great again? What is this mood I'm in? It's been 35 years since that. Since then, I've been a researcher, an educator, a student advisor, and I talk a lot, all the time. And I'm hitting menopause. So now I'm in the stage of make estrogen great again. You know? And I was like, why am I thinking about this as if we are not going back to that? We are not going back. And why am I thinking about this? And so that is where I was trying to synthesize my mood. And what I realized is that I think I was craving the 3 days of quiet that was demanded of you. That was very hard for me back then, but now I'm craving that and there were other plus points. So while you were in isolation, all your meals were brought to you. So that's 3 meals a day, 3 days, that's 9 whole meals you didn't have to prepare or think about. And it was great. What was I protesting even? And that's when I also had a recent experience where I had to attend a leadership workshop, and they make us do these strengths analysis. So you have to fill out this questionnaire, and then they'll count up the numbers and the points, whatever, and then they tell you. I wasn't even believing it until it started clicking together. So my top 3 strengths are I'm a believer, meaning I have to believe in the mission of whatever it is I'm doing to do well. Second thing was responsibility, which basically means I can never say no and just pile things on. And the third thing was I was a relator. I relate to people. Apparently I like people. I might even love people. So I didn't know that. I was surprised. And then what I realized was that that's what it is. I'm the person who, if you say, how are you? I'll tell you all about it. Like, it's never yes, no, I'm good, nod, no, let's talk. or at the water fountain where I go for filling my water bottle. 15 minutes later, I'm just talking and talking, connecting. And that's what hit me, that because of this relational existence that I have as a teacher, as a mom, as a wife, my expression of love is to talk a lot. I want people to know I love you so much. I got to tell you about it. I have so much advice to give, whether you need it or not. I got to give you advice. So much that I can't hear myself think. I don't let the other person, process the information. And my husband, my wonderful husband, Farooq, tells me that give people a chance. And I'm like, but I got to. And this is where you might think, okay, so what are you going to do about it? I think I have to do active listening. I think. But beyond that, I don't have any solutions. This is just a reflection, and I'm waiting for the wisdom from Reverend Bill's sermon. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I know. Talk about pressure. Oh, Lord. In the story of the Buddha's life, it is told that his most important sermon, foundational to the development of all the philosophy and faith that would flow from his teachings, came in his later years. By this time, he had been teaching and traveling for some time. He had grown quite a following. He gave lots of sermons. He taught many students. And in what some Buddhists consider to be his seminal sermon, akin to the Sermon on the Mount in Christianity, he said nothing, no words. It was a silent sermon. There was action, though, and a prop and an important location. In the sermon, he stood next to a pond and held up a freshly picked lotus. Lotuses grow in swampy, muddy water, and so it is thought that there would be dirt and muck dripping from the roots as he held it up. He said no words, though, and one can imagine confusion among his students, certainly a pregnant pause, at least, some drama. After a few moments of silence, one of his students smiled, and that was the moment that student attained enlightenment. It is thought that the other students did not smile, for only that student is mentioned in the accounts of this sermon. The others were left to wonder what had just happened. Some say this sermon is about happiness and peace coming from the muck and the mud, expanding on how life invariably involves pain and suffering, but all that can be transcended through certain practices and study, which is a core Buddhist teaching. Most of those practices center on mindfulness or meditation and staying in the peace of this very moment, not the regrets of moments past or the fear of moments possibly to come. The lotus reminded them to focus on the lotus, knowing that it came from the mud and will return there, but is beautiful and brings to mind peace during its life. Some say the sermon teaches the students to become their own teachers, to, from time to time, find the wisdom in the lesson without it being told to them. This is part of the maturation of a monk from a novice to a master. Learn and listen, learn and listen, learn and listen over years probably, but at some point move to directly engage the wisdom without the teacher. Emerson, the transcendentalist, would have considered this to be moving toward this unmediated experience of the divine, to seek the holy without priest or book or the commentary of others. By not offering comment, the Buddha was teaching the students to form their own, making the meaning of the lotus was what that meaning that the meaning of the lotus was what they, after years of study and practice, believed it to be. Most say that the sermon is about a wordless wisdom that can be experienced but never fully articulated. There are truths too true to be told, too profound to be voiced, too saturated with meaning to meaningfully describe. We can point at them with our words. We can face them with our practices. We can describe them with the lent authority of tradition or the academy. We can dress all that up with titles and make bland a sense of wonder with an even more bland sense of certainty. But in the end, that which is holy and true and good is beyond any full articulation of what is holy and true and good. We are all partial players in its interpretations, as are all of our traditions and beliefs, religious and secular. and all the words ever written or spoken only make these limits more evident. But if we, from time to time, just try to receive the wisdom, to be silent in its presence, and allow the evocation of awe and peace to come not from words, but from being with it, we'll be a little more enlightened anyway. I seek not enlightenment, but I'd love to be just a little more enlightened most days. And the path there probably involves more silence than words. It probably involves more wonder than certainty. It probably involves more space and less structure. Perhaps those gifts can remind us again that we don't know everything, so we can't possibly rely on words to experience or express everything. Perhaps that accompanying spiritual humility frees us to be childlike before the holy, and indeed to just smile in its presence. I am not enlightened, nor will I ever be, at least in any respectable Buddhist sense. But I remember once years ago going to see what was described to me as an experimental concert in college. The flyer and my friend who claimed to know something about it indicated that it would involve things that aren't instruments being used as instruments to make music. It was kind of a precursor to the show Stomp that I would see several years later. Trash can lids and garage tools and oil drums being used as percussion instruments, referee whistles and oven timers and kitchen utensils and other items being used symphonically. They played versions of recognizable songs, and it was pretty cool, but it was pretty loud, and it was nonstop. It went on and on. But toward the end, the program announced a piece titled 4 minutes, 33 seconds. And in it, the players maintained complete silence for that amount of time. They stood there, holding whatever they had been playing, and they switched the instruments from time to time. They paused periodically and moved a bit as musicians do in between movements, indicating that there were movements. They made no sounds, but there were sounds. I heard coughing and throat clearing, the squeaking of chairs and the opening of lobby doors, car horns from outside. I was sitting near the back under the tech booth, and in the silence, I could even hear the hum of the electronics up there. And when I realized sort of what was happening, I started to smile and even laugh a little at the oddness of it initially, and then with ease at how the items were soundless, just as they almost always were when not in use. I thought how rarely my mind is silent, and how easy it is to want to fill silence with words, noise, music, anything. And I realized how nice it was to be in that silence, in the care of a symphony who unexpectedly gifted us with that change of pace, that presence of peace. The silence became full and rich in those moments, even though it wasn't complete silence. It's no wonder that the original composer of that piece, the American John Cage, studied Zen Buddhism. It's no wonder that Zen is the branch of Buddhism most directly informed by that silent flower sermon. For in all of these, silence is, in a sense, golden. The writer Pico Iyer speaks to this gift of silence, writing, "Silence is not absence, but a presence, not emptiness, but repletion. Silence is something more than just a pause. It is the enchanted space in which things open up and surfaces fall away, and we find ourselves in the midst of absolutes. In silence, we often say we can hear ourselves think, but what is truer to say is that we can hear ourselves not think, and so sink beneath our daily selves into a place deeper than mere thought allows. Silence is a way of clearing space and staying time, of opening out so that the horizon expands itself and the air is transparent as glass. Silence is responsiveness, and in silence we can listen, and in listening to the self, the wind, the sea, we can hear something else beating far behind. And I would add that we can hear the coughing and the doors and the hum of the electronics being used by people creating this space and that art. Silence treats with generosity the human and natural symphonies that are around us. It makes us reverent and marks with awe the noises of lives being lived. It may have been this sense that caused Gandhi to teach, speak only if it improves the silence. We often view silence as something to fill, to end, to even demolish. But the great Hindu nonviolent peace and humanitarian activist viewed silence as a gift worth receiving for its own presence, not as a pause that must be overwhelmed. He's not saying that silence cannot be improved upon. And certainly Gandhi used his voice in countless ways throughout his life to promote justice and dignity. But he also spent every Monday in complete silence. His activism was rooted in that spiritual practice such that the two were inseparable in his life. His voice was formed by his time in silence, his presence among others by his time alone. He knew the risk, though, of leaning too far toward silence, also writing, "Silence becomes cowardice when occasion demands speaking out the whole truth and acting accordingly." He knew that we can be tempted, probably because being a human being, he was likely tempted at times to be silent when speech mattered. It's easier to be silent sometimes. Sometimes we don't know what to say, or we concern ourselves with how we'll say it. Sometimes we worry about the repercussions of saying things out loud. Sometimes we don't believe our voices will do anything. Gandhi viewed using silence in these situations as a kind of cowardice that put one's desire for comfort and peace ahead of the needs of our neighbors in the world. When wrongs are committed and people are hurt and generations are crushed and the planet is trashed, silence then can certainly be improved upon. Not only that, the virtue of silence can become the vice of silence if chosen in such a situation. But it's not that all or nothing situation. It's not constant speech or constant silence in addressing inequality and environmental destruction. It's being silent to be in touch with that presence, that gift, that centering, that sense of connection larger than the self in the moment, and then using one's voice to speak a different way of being into our shared spaces. That voice then becomes part of the collective voice that, over time, with consistency and with a constant ethic of reaching out beyond all that divides us, grows into a chorus that makes positive change. We sometimes feel like we have to use our voice to change the world, but it's not just our voice. We use our voices to be part of a broader movement for change that includes many voices, past, present, and future, loud voices, quiet voices, confident voices, uncertain voices. Some of us speak with assurance and fluidity. Others have to mind that old adage to speak your mind even if your voice shakes. Some of us write more than speak, and that has its place. But there are times when the shaky voiced opposition to a sudden injustice bears more transforming power than the eloquence of the greatest speaker in history. And there are times when only the shaky voice there is there to bear that power, and it's ours. And Gandhi is saying in his always peaceful way, when those moments happen, we can't be cowards. We use our voice to strengthen those moments of those movements of love and justice, and so that they then become a part of who we are. For as we act and speak and build with others, the future we want to bless those to come, we become manifestations of that very same future. The activism done in concert with silence and spiritual growth shapes us into more creative and abiding reflections of the values we hold. Or as Gandhi also said, we can be the change we wish to see in the world. We can be the change not only by advocating, but by being present with ourselves and growing in the spirit. Silence in this space helps us differentiate ourselves from the incessant toxic noise that marks politics in the media these days. It allows us some space to breathe and be, and to remember just exactly who we are, which is never a product of industries built to seed and profit from division and disgust. We are never the least common denominator proclaimed by profiteers of hatred, and neither is anyone else. Rather, we are beings of love and gratitude whose purpose is to bless one another in the world as often as we can, and away from the noise, the constant, desperate harping of who we should hate and why. We might remember our original blessing and everyone else's, that there's worth and dignity in everyone, that everyone is loved and everyone is touched by grace. We might be like the student so long ago who watched the Buddhist lift a lotus from the mud and saw that beauty could grow from the muck. We might see our world in both places. We might see ourselves in both places. Sometimes we're muddy and swampy. Sometimes we're clean and held up in the light. Usually we're somewhere in between. We're beautiful and muddy. We're growing. Some days it really feels like we're growing in a swamp. And in silence, we can gaze upon all that we are and all that the world is, even with our always partial viewpoints. And we can know a truth, a direct connection to beauty and the good. And from that, we can know the peaceful, assured activism that can sound forth later on from voices that reflect the values we live for and that we live into. The silence lets us grow within. The voice lets us grow among. And the great beauty that shines forth in every life, the great beauty that is beautiful in each of you, that great beauty then smiles in our silence and smiles in our speech. May it be so, and amen. And at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always, and always with everyone else, by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.